Okay, folks, say hi, hi. Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Who said that? I can't remember. Okay. I think someone could turn the lights on for me. Mid dark. Can't see you. Who is there? Is anyone there? Someone turn the lights on. Thank you. And maybe the fan off, but otherwise. Okay. All right, 27th of November. This is critical thinking. I want to talk just for a short time today because we've got work to do. And to talk about a cultural theorist called Slavoj Zizek. And my reasons for doing so are important. And I think he's important, although he's a little bit out of favor. Maybe he's too famous and people don't like him anymore. But let's see. So there's a joke that Zizek tells. He's famous for telling jokes. And he tells this old joke about a borrowed kettle, which Sigmund Freud quotes, in order to render the strange logic of dreams. Please, hello. Thank you. To render the strange logic of dreams, namely the enumeration of mutually exclusive answers to a reproach. So this old joke about returning a borrowed kettle. And the person who's borrowed the kettle says, well, I never borrowed your kettle, right? And then I returned the kettle to you unbroken. And 3, it was already broken when I got it from you. For Zizek, in his book on the Iraq War, the kettle is a kind of, the borrowed kettle is a metaphor or an allegory about the various explanations or excuses for the war. The war in Iraq. George Bush went to war because of Al-Qaeda hitting the September 11 Twin Towers, right? Knocking them down. But Al-Qaeda was not in Iraq. The first borrowed kettle scenario. Really, George Bush was finishing the war of his father against Saddam Hussein, their enemy. Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq and of the enemy of the US. His second borrowed kettle. Third, Saddam Hussein was an American CIA plant. Had always been the client of the US, and in fact set up by the US and used by the US to fight against Iran. So he wasn't really the enemy at the same time. I mean, in some sense, for the first Bush, Saddam Hussein thought he had been given CIA permission to invade Kuwait. Of course, if you are a friend of the US, at some point you might no longer be their friend. But this borrowed kettle for Zizek is very useful for thinking about the ideology of war. And for critical thinking, I think we really need to think about some big issues as well, like war. Just this is me at a very late stage wanting to put back into the story something that really has great importance. Iraq war, of course, is still going on, although we kind of think of it as a past conflict. Afghanistan as well. People have sort of put it on the back burner, but of course Afghanistan is still going on. I don't know if you follow the press about what's happening in Australia right now. The report on the Afghanistan war and Australia's involvement has exposed terrible war crimes, so that now even the medals that were given to all of the Australians that fought in the Afghanistan conflict have been controversially withdrawn. Meritorious good conduct, a merit badge given to all the soldiers from Australia that fought in the war has been withdrawn because of, in the context of what's been happening with the inquiry into war crimes. Those two wars are ongoing, and so are so many in this world. We are not at peace hardly in any continent. Libya, ongoing brutal civil war on the back of the outrageous NATO-backed incursion, the no-fly zone of NATO, and the support for the rebels that overthrew and assassinated Muammar Gaddafi. The conflict in Syria, white helmets and this, that, and the other, terrible ongoing situation, the massacre of whole cities and a culture. An ongoing brutal war in the Yemen and in Sudan, in northwest Pakistan, Niger Delta, the Congo, Balochistan, Palestine, of course, Somalia, Mali, Ukraine, Turkey, and on and on. I mean, I can mention more, Kashmir, and small-scale incursions, the paramilitaries in Colombia, in the jungles there, the ongoing fight in Guerrero in Mexico, in Chiapas, skirmishes between China and India on the border of that country, the northeast of India as well. The anti-Maoist pogroms, basically, in Chhattisgarh, and many others. So, you know, to start with a joke and to start with Zizek is actually also very serious, because Zizek is one critical thinker who does engage with, you know, he's in cultural studies, but he really does engage with these important political issues. Although somehow his style of presenting his material through jokes and the influence of Freud is, to be questioned. I'm just going to stop this for a second. I want to check what happened to my translation. Huh? I really had a translated file for this. It can't be right. No, that's last week. Well, not to worry. Ah. Okay, so Zizek, they call him the. Let's show you a picture of him. They call him the Elvis of cultural studies. The Elvis of cultural studies. He must be a bit embarrassed by that now. He presents his philosophy and his political commentaries with serious intent, but using jokes a lot. And he's a kind of larger than life character, as a personality, as a performer, right? He's got some physical tics as well. He's always like thinking with his bodily gestures somehow out of control, which makes for, like, you wouldn't sit in the front row necessarily, but it certainly is entertaining to watch. And he presents his commentaries on film, on cultural events, as well as political issues, with a strong philosophical commentary on some important theorists like Freud and Hegel and Marx. Well, Freud through Lacan, but still Freud is the background. So the influence of Hegel, Marx, Lacan, and Lenin, he's introduced Mao into thinking. He's certainly unashamedly a communist, and sometimes he provocatively says Stalinist thinker. And he presents his arguments sometimes by showing two alternatives and saying that both are worse, so we need to go somewhere else, which is a dialectical thinking that fits also with that story of the borrowed kettle. The dream work of Freud becomes a metaphor for the dialectic in a way. When I say Freud, I'm getting a little bit of a blank look. Is Freud someone you have not yet studied? What do you reckon? Anyone? Freud? Sigmund Freud, is he on your radar? Have you studied Sigmund Freud in sociology at all? I suspect not. Freud? Maybe I should say a few things about Sigmund Freud. People frown, so I'm worried that Freud is a really important thinker, a figure in the history of critical theory of thought, like up there with Marx, Weber, Durkheim. Benjamin Adorno and Hannah Arendt, all those people, Rosa Luxemburg. Anyway, okay, does anyone know which book, one of the most important books in the history of Western thought, social sciences, or at least Yeah, the social sciences. Was written in 1900. Does anyone know what it is? Written by Sigmund Freud. Anyone? So Sigmund Freud is not studied here. Now you could have some really interesting reading. If you read Sigmund Freud's book, Interpretation of Dreams. Sigmund Freud was a psychologist, so he is the inventor of psychoanalysis, a kind of branch of psychology with its own methodology. I mean, there are whole schools, like school universities, dedicated to psychoanalysis. A kind of therapy work, but also useful for political analysis, and just very interesting. Freud himself, by the time he wrote the Interpretation of Dreams, I think he was probably in his 30s, I'm not sure, no, maybe 40s. He died in 1939, or yeah, must have been in his 30s or 40s. It was a real breakthrough book. It presented psychoanalysis, the science of the mind, psychology of the mind, in a completely new way, and founded the discipline, if you like, the area of study called psychoanalysis. Why this is important for sociology, two means: interpretation and psychoanalysis. Interpretation of culture, of our interests, through the workings of the mind and the discovery, really, of the unconscious. The unconscious as a theme, not just the unconscious is something that exists, that is important for affecting how we work. And sometimes you do things and you keep on doing the same thing. I don't know, choosing a bad, choosing to go out with the wrong person, and you realize you stop that, and you choose someone similar again. Why do you keep on choosing the same, doing the same mistake? Or doing something more mundane, like some compulsions that we might have that we can't control, like maybe gesturing a bit funnily when you talk, like to understand what that is about. You maybe need to know some psychological, maybe there is some unconscious, not conscious psychological thing that's happening. Make that go on. Why hold the chalk while you're talking and fiddle with it like this? Hey, anxiety, nerves, and so on. Also maybe something about interpreting that can tell us. The Interpretation of Dreams was a breakthrough book because it really said something about an unexplored area of human life that's really interesting. How many of you, last night, you slept well, right? Some of you slept badly. How many of you remember your dream? You dreamed last night? Anyone? Yeah, some. Sometimes you can be too busy, you can't remember your dream, or sometimes you remember your dream, you wake up, you remember it, then forget it by the time you make your first coffee or something like that. Sometimes you remember it. A big danger is if you tell your dream to psychoanalysts. They can sometimes see into your soul, because they kind of have strategy for understanding what's going on. I will risk, and I'm risking it because, I'm afraid that by telling you about a dream that I had and my interpretation of that dream, maybe I'm misinterpreting, and maybe I will expose to you some terrible dimension of my personality that I wouldn't want to necessarily expose. But the dream kind of gives you an opportunity to interpret and see something that you wouldn't normally maybe have understood about why you do things or what's going on. But I just explained in the dream. It's simple, it's simplistic. Usually, a dream analysis will take months, and we'll have lots of different dimensions, and even several dreams will also go in to help the interpretation. And also the analyst and the dreamer, or the patient, have a relationship, and they have to work through this, what's called talking cure, talking about their unconscious and their dreams to try and recognize what is happening with their unconscious. And by knowing it, you learn how to live with it, or something like that. But just as an example of how the dream work, right? Zizek uses what's he called, the strange logic of dreams, to show their strange logic. In one small example. So a couple of nights ago, I had a dream, and I woke up a very vivid dream that I was running, like in a sporting event, in running clothes and place my wife. And I was running, but with money, and I had to run to the bank. In the dream, I was running, and I had to get to the bank. And if I didn't get to the bank, this figure something more bigger nose, with more forehead, and very angry eyes, would be upset with me. And he was the banker. Right? I'm running to the bank with this money in the dream. Why? What is that about? What's a strange dream? Running to the bank, and the banker looks like my father. He looks like my father is dead 25 years, 20 years. But very vividly, he came back to me. I haven't thought about him. I'm not even imagine what he looked like for a long time. We did not get on well. Right? So in my dream, I'm running. It's like a race, but I also want to win. I want to get the money through the bank. The bank is in front. What could this be about? Okay, so in psychoanalysis, you have some strategy to try and start the interpretation to work out what's going on. One thing Freud tells us is quite often the unconscious. It's about things that happen in your childhood that shape your thinking for the rest of your life, consciously or unconsciously. Freud, controversially, he said most girls want to marry their father, and you got into trouble for this, basically. It's sort of saying every time a woman meets a man, she's really looking for a father figure. I don't think that's true, but sometimes. And boys want to marry their mother and replace their father. Now, Malinowski, the anthropologist, reading a book about this, saying, no, it's not about, not something that happens in childhood, it's something that happens in adolescence when you become a bit reactive, that you seek someone like your ideal mother. But certainly, the idea of replacing the father, a big thing. And in a way, growing up, for someone in a family, your model of how to be an adult is often the father. Even when you hate your father. That's the model of authority, the model that you look to. And the mother, of course. Now, the other thing, so parent and desire. And then Freud breaks this down into ego, id, and superego. Ego is yourself. Id is your instincts and desires. Superego is like the father authority or society authority. And the superego is telling you this is what you should do. The id is saying this is what you really want to do. The ego is negotiating between these two. Okay? Now the dream work is a kind of another version of that negotiation. Part of it is in childhood, you set up a structure of 1 and 2. In my case, let's say, for the purpose of this dream, to replace the father. But the dream is also the dream work, the work of a dream. Every night takes material, things that happen in your day, and reworks them in a kind of narrative, storytelling, dream. Work into the categories of your unconscious. So these are like structural things in your unconscious, and then there's the daytime activity, which enters into the dream, but it gets distorted. As the brain at night processes the things that happened in the recent days, they are distorted into the categories of your unconscious memory, for instance. Alright, so to understand my dream, I have to ask what things have been significant that happened in the last few days that my unconscious might feel like I need to think through. Not consciously think through, that have happened that need to be processed in the structure of what is fundamental to my thinking, my habits and my desires, my inner working somehow. And I can think of a couple of things. Some of them are stupid, not important, but they appear as images in the dream. Some are clearly important, and I can work them out. So I'm running with money to the bank. And I went, well, of course it's obvious what I've been doing in the last 4 or 5 days. I'm buying an apartment here in Ho Chi Minh City. Right? And I've got to get money for that and pay the owner of that apartment money, right? Now the owner is not my father, and it's not the bank. But of course it goes through the bank. So I can understand that I'm trying to get the money to the bank. Why am I running? A very insignificant, not meaningful thing, but in the last 2 or 3 weeks in our faculty, we did some sporting activity. Teachers' Day, some silly competitions, right? And also on Tuesday evenings, the faculty have been playing football, Honda, and we have now faculty uniform. So I have bought actually a football kit. It says company on the back, right? You will never see it before you're But I always do it for fun. I sleep in pajamas. But I'm not going to play football. I'm slow. I'm not good at football. If it was Australian football, yeah. Anyway, so a sporting event, not a running event, but at school I was better at running than football. So maybe there's something there. Why am I running to the bank? Well, I know why what I'm wearing. That kind of explains it. But not really. I know why I'm taking money to the bank. I want to buy an apartment. But it doesn't explain why the father is the banker and why he's quite terrible. Terrible. So the psychoanalyst will say, why do you see your father in this situation as terrible? And I can say, it's not terrible, but it's almost like I've got to please that, or so to speak, that I feel like it's most important that I get there fast, and I please him. Why do I need to please him? I'm buying a house. Why am I buying a house? I think, what I'm doing finally, not finally, I've done it before, but what I'm doing by buying a house is myself being a good father. Right? I've got 2 children, I have to provide a house for them, right? And they want to live in a house with a swimming pool, where we live in Monaco. We don't have a swimming pool, they want a swimming pool. I'm showing that I'm a good father by moving, buying a house, getting an apartment with a swimming pool, and they will have, right? I will become the good father. But the dream is mad. The dream has turned me into a bad, scary father. But I still want to replace him. Yeah, I'm running to try and replace him. To be a good father for my children by buying a house. My dream makes sense to me now. It made me think I'm being crazy. But that's the way that Freud would kind of explore the crazy meanings of a dream and bring out, both by using the old unconscious structures and recent activity, right, the buying of a house and the wearing of the sporting clothes, to explain what is happening in the dream world. Make sense? Does anyone want to tell me about their dream? And try and analyze it? Yes? No? To be the risk. Think about it. And if you're interested to explore the social science study of dreams, get this book. It's a big book. I'm sure it's available. You can get. I'm not 100% sure, but I'd be very surprised if it's not translated. If it's not translated, someone should translate it straight away because, wow, it's so important. And you can get introductions to psychoanalysis, and there are many other psychoanalytical figures who have come afterwards. Most famously, Carl Jung and Jacques Lacan. Myself, this whole structure, I learned that from food. A guy called Alan Davies. And I can even find you an essay by him if you want. He was an Australian political scientist who used psychoanalysis in his political study. Now, it doesn't have to be a dream that you analyze. It could be the comments of a politician or a president talking about Al Qaeda or Iran, Iraq, or something like that. I mean, sometimes you don't need to use psychoanalysis to understand what's going on, say with Trump or something like that. But sometimes Obama might be useful. Now, Zizek uses Freud, interpreted through Lacan, but also Hegel and Marx and Lenin. He's from Slovenia, the former Czechoslovakia, right? Under Tito, there was the his first big book was that made him famous in the West. Anyway, was everything you wanted to know about Hitchcock, but were afraid to ask Lacan about the inner psychological workings of Hitchcock films. Hitchcock films are psychodramas always, and it's really interesting. He has some concepts that maybe are debatable. I've written and spoken about jouissance and passage à l'acte. Jouissance, the joy of violence, maybe. For Zizek, looking at September 11th and his other examples like the London bombing or teenage youth in France in 2006 burning cars and getting a thrill from seeing the burning cars on the nightly news in France. That was a kind of joy, jouissance, and it's a literary. We won't go into the conceptual background of all that without reading Roland Barthes. And anyway, and he called the violence a kind of meaningless, mute violence, contentless violence, merely a passage à l'acte. It was violence for its own sake. That they blew up the trade towers and left no demands, left no list of demands or message. And similarly, the burning of the bombing of London or Madrid or Bali, or the burning of the cars by youth in Paris were these, he condemns them as senseless acts of frustration and pleasure in just wrecking. I've criticized that because in some ways it seems absurd to think that the September 11 bombing of the World Trade Center wasn't very explicitly an anti-US message. It wasn't a mute and dumb, or he calls it impotent act. Like, why talk about it in terms of sexuality, impotence, the lack of sexual power? So, there are some questions to be raised about the style of his metaphor. And also there's a sense in which some of his interpretations are intentionally provocative. He means in his op-eds and his controversial statements to rile people up and discuss, to force there to be discussion. He would prefer not to anything. That's a quote from a film. So he tells us these little parables from films as allegories for making sense of contemporary politics. He has controlling stories, using controversy and exaggeration to get us to talk. So in some ways, the Elvis of cultural studies is beep bop loop up wop bam bang. It's a kind of exaggerated social science. He's not doing research in the formulaic way of doing questionnaires and getting good results. He's provoking people to debate. And that's a way of exposing political positions like Iraq, which he called first a tragedy and then a farce, quoting a famous line from Marx's 18th Brumaire. But in doing so, in order both to provoke the Marxists into discussion of the war and to provoke everyone else into saying, this war is a farce. Really, the borrowed kettle story, right? Really, the war is not about disciplining Saddam Hussein or keeping peace in the Middle East. Not even about oil, it was about weapons sales and contracts for Halliburton and other big US companies. Destroy a country with a massive expenditure of weapons, have to rebuild the stockpiles of weapons, and then have the companies come in and rebuild the cities. It's like a job creation program with some farcical, in fact, demonic dimension. So this is the dialectic, but almost like a provocative one. The dialectic as a wishing well, as a I Ching, or as almost like astrology. So Zizek sets up these debates using narrative and exaggeration, both are worse, so that he can expose something more insidious about what's going on. That the press is all concerned about the war in Syria or wherever, but they never really raise the issue of what's at stake behind it. It never becomes the slogans for talking about the war in this bite-sized news item or now Facebook post type stories that grab our attention for a few seconds that then we have to move on. They are an alibi for a much slower, wilder project of the #1 industry in the world, which is arms sales. Military equipment for sale is still the largest, heaviest investment in the US, and then France, Germany, Russia, England, the imperial powers are the #1 traders. And so on. Right, so I might skip some of this. The danger of the Iraq war, really, for Zizek is not only the military trade in the arms industry, but also the emergence of, or the normalization of a kind of right-wing excuse for these police actions, so to speak. To expose the unwritten rules of the war. Like the #1 thing is in the last, from this graph, you can see major arms exporters, 2 periods, 2008 to 12, that's under Bush, and 2013-17 is this whole period is under Obama, right? Under Obama, the great black hope, right? And you see this is the Obama poster that Zizek has appropriated, where the Obama poster was like this, but it said hope. Under Obama, US trade, weapons trade increased. The weird thing is under Trump, US military incursions internationally have reduced. His focus is more on rhetoric. You see the USA, the dark green line, percentage change. The US now has 34% of the global arms trade. This is massive. Russia has less than it did in the previous period. France has more, Germany had less, China has more, UK has more. I was surprised that the UK was #6, but you have to remember that the UK, its trade in weapons is mostly with war fighting current conflicts, Yemen and Saudis and so on. They are selling more to dubious regimes. So even though they're 6th in terms of size, maybe in terms of harsh effects, But you can look at the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 countries in size of trade in the weapons industry are the old imperial powers. We see it even more explicitly when we talk about how many billions of US dollars. 682,607 billion US dollars. I can't begin to tell you how many dong that will be. We don't have enough zeros in the world to say. And now you see the rank for export and import. And look at the countries who are importing weapons. Saudi Arabia, Australia, and Australia. Why is Australia in buying so many weapons? 1,572 billion US dollars worth of weapons to defend an island that no one can get to anyway. To defend an island from refugees in leaky boats coming from Indonesia. That's what the military does in Australia. The scandal. It's an absolute scandal. China, okay, we understand why they are building their military, and they also have the largest standing army in the world. Fourth army. India, too. Egypt, Algeria, South Korea, Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Pakistan. The major arms exporters are selling their weapons most often to conflict zones and to right-wing militarized governments. Australia is one of them. What happens in this? Check out the cultural scene of selling weapons, arms fairs, like markets where you can shop with the billions of dollars for shiny new weapons. And of course, these arms fairs are also celebrated by, opening ceremonies, closing ceremonies, and awards. Here is the Prime Minister of Britain receiving an award from their major arms export customer, the Saudi government, whose human rights record we don't want to even talk about. They don't want to talk about it, sorry. Here is Prince Charles, the Prince of England, right? England, the anti-Islamic war on terror country, sells more weapons to an Islamic country than anyone else in the world. This is the borrowed kettle. The contradiction, right? They are publicly in the press against Islam, war on terror, against fascist mullahs and against conservative Islamite ideology, but they're quite happy to take awards and do fancy dress. I mean, he is into fancy dress a lot. Check out the sword. He normally looks more like this, a proper British gentleman shooting with his mum. Okay, I'm just making fun of the royal family now, but these people, these two here, are the largest arms traders in the UK. And they get themselves photographed. This is the Queen and her husband, Prince Philip. And this is her son, Charles. This is the largest military company in the UK. They are the owners, the largest shareholders in British aerospace, in the armaments industry. But let's not just pick on that. I wanted to look at this photo and see what you think of this one. All right, this is a war photograph from a few years ago. How many of you know what this is a photograph of? Anyone? It's just 8 years ago. Okay, you know who This man is. This man? Obama. I always had to be very hard to say Osama. Obama and Joe Biden, the next prime minister, sorry, the next president of the United States. In this photograph, special critical skill. In this photograph, what are they doing? What are they doing? What do you think? What are they doing? You know? Here we go.
I think they are watching
Yeah. They're in the Situation Room of the United States White House, the military action room, the Situation Room, watching live camera feed, camera on the side of the helmet, of SEAL Team 6, US Marines specially trained. They're watching the live footage of the execution of Osama bin Laden in 2012. USA, right? They are over in Janet, they finally killed him. And then they released this photograph. Was released to the press. One, normally you do not see inside the Situation Room. Right? This is the secret war room of the United States military, the #1 decision-making place, right? And that's what it looks like. They sit at a table with a few computers and some pictures, and they have a big screen that they can watch. They didn't show us the screen. They didn't show us the body of Osama bin Laden, which they then took from Abbottabad in Pakistan and took the body onto a warship carrier and then buried him, threw his body into the sea. No pictures. They didn't want to show that. They wanted to show this. At this point, they thought, the Democratic Party thought that Hillary would be the next candidate for president. She ran against Trump and lost, right? So this photograph shows her, what's this expression? She's kind of concerned, right? We're doing it? And isn't that like, she's trying to work out what's happening, what's going, what are we watching, what does it mean? Perfect. It shows like a concern but involved with the politician. And what are they doing? They're watching what they call a snuff film. You heard this term? A snuff film is a film, you can buy them on the dark web. Film of someone being killed. That's what they're doing. They're watching a live execution of someone who has not been to court, not been charged, not been found guilty, just as enemy #1, maybe sort of claim responsibility for September 11th, but you're living in a cave in Afghanistan. Would you really have done that? He could have been an ideological supporter, but very distant. The borrowed cattle, right? But still, it was an assassination. If any other country assassinated an American in a third country, they wouldn't put a photograph of the very people who are doing it, who are responsible, on the front page of the newspaper. Like this was on the front page of the New York Times. Think of what that is. They are watching someone be executed, be assassinated, without due process, without legal justification. It's really amazing to see. And it's really surprising that while there was a bit of discussion and chatter about it at the time, it then disappeared from the press. And very quickly was replaced by a more conventional press release. And a press conference, some photographs of Obama speaking on the steps of the White House saying this is a great day for America. And two, it's a bit weird, great day for America, but this is America. Right? They claim to be for democracy. But democracy, I'm not saying that Osama bin Laden was a good guy. He was friends with the Bush family. Right? They were like Saddam, he was the CIA. You don't even have to get into the conspiracy. It's shown that the Bush family had business dealings with the Osama family. Bush started that war and ended it, or made legal capital out of this assassination. It didn't come to define his term. I don't know if you've been in the bookshop this week, but he has a book out. What's it called? I just looked at it yesterday. It's $975,000. But available already in Vietnam, just 4 days after being released in America. That's amazing as well. 4 days. Remember COVID, the airports are closed. There's not much trade. Yet a book that was released in America, one book, no books, one book, this one by Obama, has already got to the Bahasa bookshop. There in London. That's kind of incredible as well. That's like a borrowed cattle moment. You've got to be skeptical about these things. This photo is amazing. The general with all his ribbons. But Obama in very casual clothes. What is the structural contrast? Obama, the people's president. From more countries than any other US president, who assassinated more foreign leaders. Foreign leaders. When we say foreign leaders, I don't mean like prime minister or someone else. It's the head of Hamas or the head of terror cell, civil terror cell. It's an amazing photograph because it's also kind of like casual scene. Can you imagine your family sitting around the TV watching? And that's almost what this is. This is the family of the White House sitting around watching some TV. That's what the structure is. Like everyone else, they're watching TV, except what they're watching is so radically different. Snuff film. That being used then to promote the legacy of Obama. I don't think we can say this is not a calculated use of the photograph. The photograph was released for obvious reasons. You know, it shows the concern of Hillary. It shows Obama is intent and passionate, but casual. It shows the military is controlled, and it's a better image to show than a date of summer or something like that. But all of these events, all of these photos and press releases and so on are to be interpreted as a kind of dream. This is the dream work of America, and we need to see what is the unconscious and conscious dimensions of this. The unconscious, I'm saying, is they're like a family. What a strange idea that is, though, to think that the world is being run, now this is the global government after all, America, by people that are just like your family. They gather together and watch TV and check their emails and do all the things that you and I do. Except that they're in charge of the greatest military machine the world has known and the largest economy, weapons there's ever been. They're not like your family at all. But they sit around in their casual clothes, no tie, sports just a polo shirt. Oh, I thought for a minute they were getting pizza. I didn't know that's some California. It's casual. And the cousins have come in as well, the non-central members of the family. This is to be analysed. Critical thinking would be not to just accept this photograph as a blame branded coffee and soft drinks. Okay. This guy, I think one of them is taking off their glasses so they can do their email. He's checking. Or maybe he's the one who's sending instructions to SEAL Team 6. SEAL Team 6 were given medals for this. They were celebrated. They trained in Nevada. They trained with actors who were dressed up like Osama bin Laden's family. They were South Asian Americans paid to pretend to be the terrorists, and they rehearsed. They knew what they were planning to do. Even there, they still lost one helicopter in the compound. It's war. What then of who replaced Obama? Actually, things changed so much in the last 2 weeks that I don't even want to get into the dream work of studying Trump. But every photograph of Trump tells a kind of story. Early in the presidency, he was replacing Obama. Then he started to tell you about fake news, right? He wanted to grab your attention. Then, even more, he was trying to make his point and no one was listening. Eventually, he was on the run, shouting, now you have to give up and leave. Well, you can tell the story of the photographs, but I'm not going to get into, it's too early to be celebrating the end of Trump. And also, Biden is not necessarily better. Okay, let's take a break, and after the break we are getting into the zine that we're producing and just looking at that. How do I stop this? All right, 10 minutes break. Thank you very much.